Hi everyone. Thank you very much for deciding to join my session. We have a limited time, so I'm just going to get started right away. I'm going to let you first know a bit about myself. So my name is Çlirim Sheremeti. I come from Kosovo. Pristina is the capital of Kosovo. That's where I currently live. I'm the founder and CEO of 4H Kosova. So I started this organization 3.5 years ago, and it's part of the global 4H network of youth development organizations that are present in 50 countries and count 7 million members around the world. In the past 3.5 years, together with my team, I managed to grow the organization into around $40,000 of funding, more than 20 volunteers, more than 5 staff members, and we also have 3 functional programs. And we expect double the growth within the upcoming year. And other than that, I've also personally been active in youth development, non-formal education, and corporate social responsibility for more than 8 years. The reason why I mentioned this is so that I can show you that hopefully I know what I'm talking about. So the topic for today is going to be, should you really start a new organization to create change? And basically what we're going to be doing together is that we're going to look at 2 main things. The first one is going to be advantages and drawbacks of adapting a global model into a local context. And then the second objective for today is going to be exploring some practical steps on how to approach the process of adapting a global model into the local context. So basically, we're going to be looking at the advantages, drawbacks, and also practical steps of global models that exist out there for making social change. Should we rather look into adapting them into a local context? What are advantages? What are drawbacks? How can we do that if we decide to do that? Okay. So our first objective, which is advantages and drawbacks, we're going to start with a short activity right away. So before I talk about advantages and drawbacks, I want to hear about what you guys think are the main advantages and drawbacks, okay? So the way we're going to do that is that we're going to be divided in 2 teams, and you're not going to be working together. You just need to be part of one team. So I want every one of you that was born between the 1st of January and 30th of June is Team Mango, right? So just know what team you belong to. And everyone born between 1st of July and 31st of December is Team Blueberry, okay? So Laura is going to be sending a link right now in the chat, and you're going to be sharing your answers via Google Slides. So what we're going to do is that everyone in Team Mango is going to write about advantages of working with a global model in your local context. And then everyone in Team Blueberry is going to write about the drawbacks or negatives of working with a global model in your local context. So how we're going to do this is, let me just go to the activities part. So this is the link. And Team Mango is going to write here, and you can write your answer just by double clicking here. And I want everyone to give one answer individually, so 1 participant per box. And you can just give your answer so by double clicking, and then you can just start writing here, right? So take your time. You have around 6 minutes to do this. And just think about, you know, advantages, drawbacks, whichever team you're on. And if you have any questions, let me know, okay? Okay, I see networking. That's a really good point. That's really important. I like that. Do we have anyone on Team Blueberry? Anyone who was born between 31st of July, actually 1st of July and then 31st of December? We also need to look at the drawbacks and the negatives. International recognition, that's another really important one. Personal development, that's also a really important point. So when it comes to drawbacks, for example, I know it's a little bit tricky to think about what could be drawbacks of getting a global model. Think about maybe what kind of limitations you would have in working with someone who doesn't really know your local context, right? So think about how that relationship could work maybe. think about what kind of maybe rules they would give you or what kind of limitations. Outreach and collaboration, very important. So I feel like Team Mango could take up the first part of my presentation completely. Like you guys can do what I was going to talk about. Okay, so we have around 3 more minutes. If you guys have any more ideas, anything you want to add, feel free to add it now. Language barrier, that's a good one. Yeah, so a lot of the topics that have been in the summit so far, and I expect you've also participated in some of the other sessions, they've been about how to make your organization, how to make your work more inclusive. So that's definitely a very important point. Religious beliefs, another important one. Cultural difference, that's good. If anyone is maybe having some issue with Google Slides or anything, feel also free to write your answers or your opinions in the chat. That also works. Political difference, definitely. So that affects your mindset, how you approach the issue, all of that. Yeah. Good. Okay, we have 1.5 minutes left. So 1 minute and 30 seconds. So if you have any last ideas you want to add, feel free to drop them.
Çlirim, we have in our chat somebody stating government policy for a drawback.
Government policy for a drawback. Okay, yeah, that's actually a good point. I see how that could work. Yeah, if the international organization is very closely related to the national government, that could limit how it operates in other countries. So that makes sense. That's a good point. Nice. Global challenge solving. Yeah. We've never been more connected than we already are. So definitely that's a strong advantage. Better opportunity. Yeah. Nice. Okay, so we have around 30 seconds left. Any final last ideas you might have, put them in. Skills shared. Nice. Okay. Lack of open-mindedness, very important. And last one, better engagement. Nice. Okay, so we've pretty much run out of time for this activity, but I really like what you guys put here. It seems like at least the ones who contributed are already familiar with a lot of parts of what we're going to be talking about, and they're very similar to some of the things that I have already mentioned. So in terms of advantages, I've decided to point out 4 main categories in which most of the advantages you guys already mentioned fall in. So it's historical knowledge, access to years of content, curriculum, and research. It's global network and support system, and it's also brand recognition. So the first one, historical knowledge, an international organization usually has taken its time to develop and also grow and scale internationally. It has, it just has historical knowledge on the field that it works on. It's been operating in it for a few years. It understands the challenges of the field. It understands how the field has developed in a few years, for however long that organization has been operating. So just by deciding to bring or to be part of a global organization or bring a global model locally, you're immediately going to have access to that sort of historical knowledge, right? And related to that is also having access to years of content, curriculum, and research, because these organizations have certain programs, they have certain ways that they work through, they have, they've done research to support their cause and to look at whether their model of work is actually functioning and having the impact it should. So you immediately also gain access to years of that content, curriculum, and research that has been developed. which means that you don't necessarily have to start from scratch, and you already have, you have things that you can take from other countries that has already been developed, right? Another point is having access to this global network and support system. So as I mentioned in my case with 4H Kosova, the organization is present in 50 countries, has 7 million members. I had the honor of participating in a global network meeting in Canada in 2017. So our organization really started to pick up and sort of do the real work it's doing right now after we participated in that global network meeting. So having access to the global network both gives you access to a series of like advisors and counselors that have been doing this work for maybe decades and know the field probably much better than you already do. You have access to people who can not just give you advice, they can also maybe lead you in the right direction. They can help you with your programs, they can help you with the way that you're trying to work. And even leaving all of that value aside, just having access to a support system that understands your vision, understands what you're trying to do, the problem that you're trying to solve, that can be a value on its own. Because as change makers, we all know that sometimes this job can feel a little bit lonely because we're fighting, against the system, we're trying to create real change. So just having access to that support system, people with a similar mindset, with similar beliefs can be really, really helpful. And then the last point I would mention is brand recognition. So when we started 4H in Kosovo, nobody really knew us because 4H was not a thing here. So our first post on social media was like a very simple, like square, like with text. And what it said was 50 years, 7 million members, 130 years of history, now also in Kosovo, right? So we sort of relied on everything that 4H had been developing for so long. It's like a globally recognized brand. It's one of the biggest youth organizations in the US. So we basically just called on that. And we gained brand recognition here just by people associating us with the bigger like global brand. As a byproduct of all of these is also usually better funding opportunities, because if you start a new organization from scratch and you're trying to apply, you as an individual might have experience, but it's going to be a bit harder for donors to trust you with their money if they don't already see like a proven proof of concept, if they don't see that this might already have a reason to work. So if you have this global model, you can say, look, like this has already worked in the US, this has worked in Canada, this has worked in Germany. We're just trying to also bring this in my own country. And you have proof that this approach has worked elsewhere. And you have enough proof to just get other people to take a risk or to just trust you with their money to try and figure it out, right? So do you have any questions so far about the advantages part? Just feel free, even if you don't have any questions right now while we're talking, just feel free to add any questions you might have in the chat, and then we'll read them out throughout the session. So Laura, do we have any questions so far?
No questions at the moment. Let's just give it 1 minute.
Okay. So you guys have 1 minute. Just think about what we talked. If you have any questions for me.
No questions. I think we can move on.
Okay, great. So
oh wait,
again,
sorry. We had one question come through. How do you apply for grants?
How do you apply for grants? I think that's a bit outside the scope of this workshop. There's a lot of ways you can apply for grants. One of the most popular one is open calls. I'm not going to go into much detail, but just Google how to apply for grants. There's a lot of knowledge already there, but it's a bit outside the scope of this workshop. But that's a very important thing to know. Yeah. Laura, any other questions?
That was all. You can move on to the next section.
So again, if you have any other questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. And then when we get to another question slide, we'll address them, okay? So now to move on to drawbacks, I've also tried to point out 4 main parts. So the first one would be strict rules and guidelines. Another drawback or negative would be too much oversight. A third drawback would be too much reliance on the support network and global funding. And then the fourth drawback would be historical baggage. So pretty much the drawbacks that you pointed out, Team Blueberry, most, if not all of them, fall within these four categories, right? So the first one, strict rules and guidelines, would be that some international organizations have very specific ways of how they are going to expand and how they do things. On one hand, this is important because if you need to scale, you need to have systems and you need to have, well-defined ways of how you do things. On the other hand, having strict rules and guidelines can be a drawback because it doesn't really allow you to move freely in your local context. So rules or guidelines that are applicable maybe in Germany or France, like Western Europe, might not be applicable to the culture or the way people do things in certain countries in Africa or Middle East, or like even here in the Balkans, where Kosovo is located in. Like, we're in the same continent, it's still Europe, but the way people think and they work and the way that they do social, like the way they treat social issues is really different from Western countries. So those rules and guidelines might limit you in a sense. Another drawback, which is closely connected to the first one, is having too much oversight. These international organizations whose local chapters or whose models you are adapting or opening in your own country, they might require too much of you, like they might be too strict about the way that they're trying to do things. They might require too many reports of you. They might require you to follow a very specific set of the way things should be done. And in that case, it's going to be up to you. If you decide to do this, like, is it really worth it to sacrifice sort of like that freedom to adapt to the local context in exchange for, getting this model and trying to have the impact that it should have? Because although all of the advantages that we just mentioned are really important, at the end of the day, you're trying to help or change the lives of people in your community, in your country. So you have to decide to do what's best for them, right? And having too much oversight, having too many strict rules that come from someone who doesn't really know your context is not always going to be helpful. A third point could be too much reliance on the support network and global funding. So I believe real sustainable change comes to the point where it's the beneficiaries that are sort of becoming owners of what's already happening, and they are able to carry that change themselves into the local communities. It doesn't necessarily have to be you as the founder or the co-founder who is sort of pushing things onto them. So in that sense, some international organizations have different funding schemes, like you can apply for different calls. They might give you advisors pro bono. They might give you different in-kind donations, access to platforms, which are really helpful when you're getting started. But you have to get to a point where you become self-independent and you become self-reliant and you become self-sustainable, so that, again, at the end of the day, you are able to do what's best for your own people in your own community, right? And then the fourth point could be historical baggage, which some of you already mentioned. So like religious barriers, cultural barriers. This is pretty much where most of that falls in. So an example could be that 4-H globally has a pledge, which is wonderful. It goes, I pledge my head to clearer thinking, my heart to greater loyalty, my hands to larger service, my health to better living. But we decided to not adapt that pledge in Kosovo. And the main reason is that we never do pledges here. It's not something that people feel comfortable with. So we were afraid that people might be a bit scared of pledges. It's something that is mostly done like in militaries or religious organizations. So because it was something that could maybe turn people off, we decided to not do it, at least for the time being, because of our understanding of the cultural standards here. Another example could be, like, as you mentioned, religious barriers. YMCA, which is one of the, and maybe you've heard the song YMCA, Like it's one of the biggest youth organizations in the United States. It stands for Young Men's Christian Association. So just like the name, when it's said fully, just the name itself could be an issue if you're trying to start a local chapter in a Muslim majority country, right? Because just people might feel less attracted to participating in those activities. They might feel like it's challenging their own beliefs. So in a sense, you also have to be aware of the historical baggage, the connotation, your own local context when you're trying to adapt a global model in your local context. Okay. So do we have any new questions, Laura?
No new questions. I'll give it a couple seconds just in case.
Yeah.
I think we're good to go.
Okay, awesome. I hope you're all with me so far. This pretty much concludes our objective 1 content. So before we move to the practical steps, I want us to just take a step back and slow down a bit. So if you could, I want you to close your eyes, and we're going to take some deep breaths together. So I'm going to guide you through the breaths, okay? So just close your eyes, and we're going to breathe in. And breathe out. Breathe in. Breathe out. One more. Breathe in. And breathe out. Okay. Breath is a really powerful tool to just sort of center yourself again. So that was a mini break. And we're going to move on to our second objective, which is practical steps. And I want you guys, so I mentioned in the beginning, it's good if you have some pen and paper close to you, or if you're taking notes online, I want you to just maybe be a bit more attentive to this part, but the session is going to be recorded, so you can revisit this content at any point in the future too. So in terms of practical steps, from my experience, there are 2 main ways that if you decide to bring a global model in your local context, there are 2 main ways to do it. So the first option is to open a local chapter of a global organization. And then the second option, which is a bit harder, but it can also be much more impactful if you figure it out, is to take elements of global models to create your own model, okay? And this is, option 2 is pretty much what we did with 4H Kosovo here. So I'm gonna go through the details of each option, okay? So in terms of option 1, open a local chapter of a global organization, and these are very practical steps. The first step could be to start by researching functional models in countries that are similar to yours, right? So let's say you work in education, non-formal education, like you're trying to offer after-school clubs or programs for young people. What you could first do is by researching organizations in countries that are similar to yours. And what I mean similar to yours is by looking at demographics, which means, you know, the average age of the people, the mix of maybe gender, and then also looking at psychographics, which means what are people mostly interested in, what are their hobbies usually, what do they like to do in their free times. But at the same time, in psychographics, you could also look at what we talked about, like the cultural similarity. Also, do they have similar traditions? Do they have similar approach to work? And then you also look at, do they have similar social issues? Are they dealing with similar problems that you are also dealing with in your own country or your own community? And then you could also look at the historical context. So is there any similarity to what they've gone through historically, like the problems they've had, the challenges they've had, maybe the political background, basically what they've gone through, is it similar to your own context? A very simple way you can do this, if you just don't know where to start, is you can look up in Google, like NGOs in youth development, World NGO database, top 100 NGOs or social enterprises in the world, and then you can just start from there, like, right? So like you can open a bunch of them, and then you can look at what they do, and then you can start narrowing down more or less, like looking at exactly what you need and what you want to know more of, right? And then by looking at these organizations, you're going to start identifying organizations whose work you would like to adapt in your own country. Like, you're going to find some of them very exciting. You're going to like think, oh, wow, like I would have loved to have had this while I was growing up. I think there is someone in my family, in my friend circle, who could really benefit from this. Or you've been looking at doing this kind of work for a while. You're thinking, this is how I think this should be done. After you identify these organizations, you have to do the hardest part, which is the hardest part for most people, but it's also really simple. You just have to reach out to them, right? So you have to take action. Some of these organizations have standard procedures for opening local chapters. Like within their website, they could have a part where it says, work with us or join us or start your own chapter. Like YMCA, for example, I think it works with local chapters. Some others might require you to reach out via email and then start the conversation, right? Once you get to this point, you identify organizations whose work you like, who you think like getting them in your own country could work really well for your context. You should also look at how their model, maybe you're looking at like YMCA or 4-H in the US. Just look at also like how 4-H is working in Finland, how 4-H is working in South Korea, how is it working in Brazil, so that you get a better idea of how these countries, like what kind of freedom have they had to make changes, how have they adapted, you know, all of those details. From here, you just pick up the conversation, you figure out their conditions of expansion. Do they provide funding? Do they provide advising? How would your relationship work? And then based on this information, you choose whether you want to start the local chapter, whether you would decide to put it off for later, or whether you just want to work with another organization or you want to take a different path, right? So it's pretty straightforward. This is very practical advice. All you have to do is that you have to sit down and do the work, right? And then option 2, which would be take elements of global models to create your own. You would pretty much start off in the same way, right? So you would still research functional models in countries with a demographic, economic development level, social issues, historical context that are similar to your own country. But instead of looking at how they can expand, you would go deeper into the work of these specific organizations. So you would look at how do they work, how do they structure their programs, how do they usually expand, what methodologies maybe they use. And instead of reaching out to them and saying, hey, can I start this here? Maybe you can reach out and learn more about their model. Or if this information is already public, then you should just analyze and then deconstruct the model that they're using, right? So you should be able to look at what methodologies are they using, what is maybe their structure and timeline of programs, do they require qualifications, do they offer certifications, what is their training approach, partnership approach. So basically, how do they do what they do, right? What are the details of how they do their work, right? And then based on your experience, but also you have to advise with other people. I'm going to talk about this a bit more in just a couple of seconds. You're going to evaluate which elements make sense to be implemented as they are in your own context, right? So you're taking like, let's say you're taking a really like complex car, like a Jeep or something, and then you're breaking it down, but you don't really need a Jeep because you don't live in the mountains. Like all you need is the engine, and you need like the turning wheel, and you need like a couple of wheels, and then that's it, right? So you just need to move from point A to point B. What you're going to be doing at this point, you're just going to be looking at everything the model has, like all of the elements, and you're going to look at which ones make sense in your own local context, like the work that you need. So yeah, as I mentioned, at this point, make sure to get also advice from people, and make sure to advise with people who have been working in this field in your own country for a while, because they understand the context better, they know how this works better, and also be wary of your own assumptions. So sometimes if you're building a program for people who have never volunteered, but you have been volunteering since maybe you were 15 years old, then it's obviously going to be, you're going to be biased, right? So you're going to have assumptions that things work differently, and you're going to have a harder time building something that works for those people. So make sure to also get different perspectives on how to do this. And then the elements that are too foreign or don't make sense for your country, just look at whether they're necessary at all, right? Some things are just sprinkles and complications that were added over time that aren't really necessary or important to the crucial impact that the program is having. For example, the first time I looked at 4-H organizational structure in the US, I almost had a panic attack because it looked like a very complex tree with so many different units. And I thought, how am I going to do this in my own country? But I realized that the reason why they have that is because they've been operating for 130 years. So they had to figure out a way to make all of the different elements work. But back when they started, it was much, much more simple, right? So what you need to do is that you need to figure out what are the crucial or the main components that make that thing work. And then that's what you need to focus on. You're going to add everything else over time, right? And then once you have decided what elements you want to keep, and then you've combined these simple elements, you need to go out and test it in the local community. You need to test it with those people who you're trying to help. And then you need to get immediate feedback, right? So it's like a design thinking process. You're just going to put it out there. You're going to test it. You're going to get feedback. Those people are going to tell you what works, what doesn't. You're going to test what is most important, so those crucial parts. And then you're going to implement that feedback into the second version, right? And you repeat this process. So you test, you learn, you put those learnings in, then you test the second version. You're going to repeat that until you feel it's ready to be launched on a wider scale, right? So it's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward. Just make sure that you follow these steps roughly, right? Because some things are going to change in your local context. So I know that was a lot of content. Do we have any questions? Laura, do we have any questions?
Nothing in the chat now. We can give a couple seconds. So we don't have anything coming through now. I think we can move forward, and I'll let you know if anything pops up.
Okay. So if everyone sort of understood the practical steps and all the advice, we're going to move on to our second activity. And this is actually, let me just also point this out before we move to the activity. So I know that was a lot of content. One key takeaway that I want you guys to have from this part is that essentially there is a reason why this organization or work model is global in the first place, right? So there's a reason why they managed to replicate the work that they do in one country in also different countries, and why they managed to be successful in all of these different contexts, right? So within the work that they do, there are fundamental components that make them successful. And it's your job to understand what those fundamental components are by identifying the pattern of what is repeated or what stays pretty much the same throughout the different countries, right? You need to look at what is that one constant that doesn't really change. And then that's the thing that you need to take and test in your own local context until you make it work, right? So all of the different stuff, like how big their offices are, how many partners do they have, how many staff members do they employ, that's all going to come with time. The first thing that you need to do is that you need to figure out what is that one key thing, one fundamental component that makes that organization successful in so many different countries and so many different demographics or contexts, right? So we're going to move to the second activity. This is going to be a longer one. So you have 24 hours for this. We're going to do this activity. You're going to do this on your own. And then you're going to come back to the discussion forum on the summit. And then you're going to share your results. So before I explain exactly what you're going to do, I just want you to know that if you have any questions or need help during this process, please reach out to me via email. And Laura, if you could just drop the email. Sorry about that. Okay. So if you could just drop my email in the chat so that everyone has it. So what you're going to be doing for the second activity is that you're basically going to be taking the first step of getting a global organization in your own local country or local community. So the first step, what I want you guys to do is that you're going to do research on global organizations and work models on your field. So whatever problem that you're trying to solve, whatever social issue you're working on, that's what you're going to research global organizations on. And if you don't work in one field yet, just choose youth engagement as that is related to this summit, okay? And then the second step would be that I want you to identify one international NGO that works in the field you do. And again, if you don't work in a specific field, just choose youth engagement, and that you would like to cooperate with. So one organization whose work you like, who you respect, who you think is doing great work, and then I want you to reach out to them, okay? You're gonna send them an email, and then you're gonna point out who you are, what do you do, why you're reaching out, and you're either gonna propose a meeting, like you're gonna ask them to meet with you to give you more information, or in that email, you're gonna ask them a few questions about their work, and you're gonna request more information. So if you don't know how to write that email, I've prepared the sample message for you. And Laura, if you could also just drop the sample message in the chat, please. So dear, for example, 4-H representative, my name is Çlirim Sheremeti, and I am a young change maker from Pristina, which is in Kosovo. I have been working on youth engagement for a while, and I love your work. So I'm interested to see if we can work together to increase youth engagement in my city. Do you have any material you can send me, or can we schedule a call to talk more, right? So this is only the first step, but I still want you guys to take action so that you understand how this works, and also so that you're a bit more committed to this general direction, right? And then after you've done this, I want you to also answer these two questions by yourself. So the first one would be, how did I feel during this process, and how do I feel after reaching out? And then the second question would be, will I be pursuing this cooperation or partnership if I get a positive answer? Okay. And then I want you to share this experience and what you've been doing, either in the discussion forum within the Summit platform. So if you could, Laura, also please send the link for that. So I've opened the discussion forum in the platform. It's public. The discussion forum is named Activity 2, Reaching Out to International Organizations. If for some reason you cannot upload your answers in the discussion forum, you can send them to me via email directly at my email. Just make sure to write in the subject IYF Summit Activity, okay? So do you have any questions about these instructions? Do you understand what you guys need to do?
No questions about this, Çlirim. We did have a question from Sofnan asking more generally from the presentation. So this means that companies can succeed in some environments and some can fail elsewhere.
Oh, yeah, definitely. So there's a lot of elements that change from a geographical location to the other, even if those places might be very closely together. So there's a different, and thank you for the question. That's a really good question. So there are different political scenes. There are different laws and rules that apply. There are different traditions. There are cultural differences, religious differences. It's a different historical context. For example, in Kosovo, volunteering is not perceived as something that people might do for fun or that helps them with their CV. or their development, but rather volunteering is something that comes out of need, right? So if there is someone in need, if there's been an emergency, maybe an earthquake, the pandemic, for example, that's when people feel most likely to volunteer, but it's not something that they also see as a way to also develop themselves, right? So our organization has also been working to try and change the youth's perception on how they should use volunteering also for their personal development. So if you understand your local context well, and then you also understand what makes the organization successful in another context, you can figure out what elements to get to your own country in order to make it work successfully. But yeah, I mean, an organization like the exact same one from another country coming to your country can fail even if it's doing everything the same. So you have to adapt also locally. Yeah. Are there any other questions?
No other questions.
Okay, so I think we're doing pretty good on time. So I'm going to do a brief recap. So what we talked about today is we went through two main objectives. So the first one was looking at advantages and drawbacks of adapting a global model in your local context. So we mentioned a number of advantages, and Team Mango, thank you for your answers. So it was access to historical knowledge, it was access to years of content, research curriculum, it was brand recognition. So those are all things that give you an advantage when you're adapting a global model in your local context. On the other hand, some of the drawbacks, which are sometimes double-edged swords, because as much as they serve as advantages, they can also be drawbacks. They were strict rules and guidelines. They were having too much oversight, relying too much on the global support, whether that's funding or other kinds of support, and at the same time having historical baggage, which could then be a problem if there are too many religious or cultural or political differences between the different countries that you're trying to adapt the approach to. And then on the second part, so the second objective, we looked at some super practical steps that you can take in order to adapt that global model in your local context. So there are two main ways to do it. The first one, which is the simpler one, but also a bit more limited, is just starting a local chapter of a global organization. And that's something that some international organizations offer. And then the second option, which has the potential to be much more impactful, but is also a little bit harder to do, is deconstructing the global model and then combining those elements to make your own model in the local context. So again, for all of the details, you guys are going to have access to this presentation. So it's the video, so you're going to be able to go back and look at all the specifics of the steps. And then as a final activity, you guys are going to have 24 hours to reach out to one international organization and then bring back your experience and share it with everyone else in the discussion forum. So as a final reflection, Laura, do we have time for this?
We have about a minute.
We have about a minute? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So 1 minute. If you guys can do this, same link. So I just want you to share the same link that we did the other activity. So Laura, if you could just resend it, just go to this slide. So slide number 3. I want you to answer in the small boxes. So what is one key thing that you guys learned today and why do you think it's important? Okay? Okay, so we're gonna move on, but feel free to write your answers after this session is over. But even if you don't do it in this Google Slides part, I would still encourage you guys to do it on your own because it just helps you reflect on why this session was helpful and what you learned today. As a final note, I also want to mention that Laura will send the survey link in the chat right now. So it's a survey to give feedback for the session. So if you have time, please complete the survey and give us your feedback, okay? So Laura is probably already has sent the link, right?
Yes, all good.
Okay, so it's in the chat. Okay, so this was pretty much our session. Thank you very much. It was really nice to share these lessons. I was hoping you guys would interact a bit more, but that's okay as long as you manage to take these lessons, and as long as they are going to be helpful to their stories of social change. I want you to feel free to reach out to me either through social media, which you already have access to. I mean, you have my social media in the speaker bio, I think, or reach out to me via email if you have any other questions. But at the same time, I would also love to just learn more about the work that you do, hear about your stories of change making. Okay, so this was pretty much our session. Thank you very much, and best of luck with your change making.